Hey, welcome everybody. This is John Paul Mendoza with It's a Paul World, and we are joined from an exotic climb, a place that many of you may want to go to because of the COVID lockdown. Well, maybe you can soon, but before you do that, you're going to want to go to Freedom Fest in Rapid City, South Dakota. And I have Ken Schoolland.
Yeah.
And so welcome, Ken, and tell us a little bit about it, because Ken is one of those guys who just he's an internationally known author. And I don't think he wanted to start out that way, but he's going to have a fascinating story. So Ken, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to meet you, John Paul. Do I call you John Paul or John?
That's great. That's
John
great.
Paul?
Well, yeah. See, they named two popes after me. So I just said, listen, if it's good enough for the two popes, I'll stick with it. So yeah.
Actually, I was thinking of John Paul Jones, but the popes are okay.
Well, okay, Ken, if you want to go into that. So here's the story. So my father was in the U.S. Navy, and of course John Paul Jones, because they're trying to pick a name for me. And my mother was very religious, so John and Paul worked out pretty well there too. So how do you bring a Navy seaman and very very devout Catholic together? John Paul. So there we go.
Excellent.
So,
well, thank you very much for inviting me to this program. Yes, I'm heading off to Freedom Fest. My wife and I are both making presentations. My wife is actually giving 4 presentations about China, and in panels and debates about that. She grew up in China during the Cultural Revolution and experienced the worst of the horrors of all that time. And my experience, well, I grew up in Arizona, but lived in Alaska, Washington, D.C., and then I moved to Hawaii, where I met Roger McBride when he was the presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, and been a Libertarian ever since then. And I was asked early on to do some radio commentaries for the Libertarian Party of Hawaii, and those, when they were straight commentaries from an economist, I'm an economist at Hawaii Pacific University, that was rather boring. So I turned it into a story like Gulliver's Travels.
oh,
and the story picked up. It was humorous and satirized the policies of the day while engaging people pretty well. So it became pretty popular, and Small Business Hawaii put it together as a book to promote free market ideas in the schools. Since then, the International Society for Individual Liberty, which is now named Liberty International, disseminated the idea worldwide through their conferences. And since then, it's been published in more than 85 editions in more than 55 languages. And it's popularized the ideas of free markets all around the world. And because it's a satire and a humorous story, it got around a lot of the censors. In Iran, it was published in Farsi as the first free market book published there since the crackdowns of the Ayatollah. And it was the first free market book in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, in China and Vietnam, and a lot of countries. So it's been produced also as theatrical productions in Eastern Europe, in Africa, and in Asia, especially Kazakhstan. It's won the endorsement of Milton Friedman, Walter Williams, Steve Forbes, John Stossel, Walter Williams, did I mention him? Yeah.
it did.
And Mark Skousen. In fact, Mark awarded it the first Leonard E. Reed Book Award when he started Freedom Fest many years ago.
Well, that's great. So Ken, you've been busy doing that, and obviously it's great to get that message out. In fact, I would probably love to interview your wife. She's going to be talking at Freedom Fest also. And that's excellent. So talk a little bit about where you see the whole libertarian movement as it sits right now. I mean, because you're obviously in a different vantage point. You're in Hawaii, and you hopefully you're a little away from some of the crazy, but every place has a little of that right now.
Well, we live in Hawaii. At the moment, I'm right now physically in Dallas, Texas, where we're spending some time with my wife's parents. But Hawaii is a very, very comfortable and pleasant place to live. I encourage everybody to come and visit. But of course, Dallas is a great place too. It's a low tax state, and we're glad to see a lot of Californians discovering that. Um, as far as the the libertarian movement, I'm reminded of, I think there was an interview by Eugene Debs many years ago. You know, he was the head of the Socialist Party that was trying to run for president over the years in the first part of the 20th century.
Right.
And I remember there was an interview with him one time where they said, you know, isn't it discouraging for you? You keep running for office and you keep losing the elections. Why don't you just give up? He says, losing? Are you kidding? I have lost the election, but I've won the ideas. I mean, I look at the Democratic and Republican Party platforms. They've adopted our platforms, so I've won. And I can't help but be reminded about how important it is to get the ideas out there in contest with the mainstream ideas of Democrats and Republicans. And so the Libertarian Party movement is on the platform. It's always promoting ideas as a rallying point for people of like mind. I'm often reminded of Rand Paul's father, Ron Paul, who was the presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, brought a lot of people into the party. And of course, I think of Rand Paul very fondly too, because he carries on a lot of the ideals that his father championed.
Well, and right now he's
Lost.
no, and right now, you know, with Rand Paul fighting in the Senate and trying to put in place the, you know, if you're vaccinated and you're going to be on an airplane, you don't need to wear a mask, and get rid of that ridiculous mandate and to do that. So I think that Rand Paul, I mean, you know, my brother and I got excited about Rand Paul in 2013. We put our own money and energy behind it. Obviously, 2016 didn't turn out the way we wanted it to. No point in 2020, but now we can look out forward to 2024. Rand has been out there and building a base, building, I think, more insights about what's going on and how to actually step up to that. And sometimes it takes that maturation process. And I think he is, as you say, he's getting that message out to more people and actually getting people to say, oh, wait a second, you know, there are other ways to think. We don't just have to be stuck with this kind of, you know, dogma of, you know, two ideas and that's it. So I really think that's why we're excited about him. So talk about what you're going to be doing at Freedom Fest. So what are you going to be doing and speaking about?
My first, I mean, I've spoken for many years there. Mark Skousen has been very kind to invite me. This time it's going to be on a panel about the Jones Act. And usually when I say the Jones Act, people's eyes glaze over and they say, well, what's that? Who cares about that? I don't know if you've heard about it personally, but few people have heard about the Jones Act. Have you heard about it? I'm curious.
I have not. I have not heard about it.
Perfect opportunity.
I'm in the dark. Enlighten me.
The Jones Act was passed by a congressman from Washington State in 1920 to make sure that every ship that carries cargo from one American port to another American port has to be on a ship that was built in America, crewed mostly with Americans, owned mostly by Americans, and flying the American flag, thus those regulations and controls. Well, just the ship build requirement alone adds 5 times to the cost of a ship.
Right.
I mean, those ships are much more expensive, and therefore everything they carry from one American port to another American port. And that's really critical for people living in Hawaii, because we get so much from California that's on shipping. It adds enormously to the cost of shipping. Has been estimated $1,800 per family per year. And I think that's a very conservative estimate. It's shut down a lot of businesses that can't even thrive now. So I think this is like it's a form of protectionism. It's to shield an industry that's been rapidly in the decline since 1920. We now have less than 0.5% of the world's shipping fleet, and it's built in four shipyards.
Right.
That they build maybe 3 or 4 ocean-going vessels a year that are very expensive. And well, and even those shipyards mostly are owned by foreign companies in Singapore or Norway. And so it's a highly protectionist thing. They contribute to campaigns a lot to get congressmen and senators to keep their protectionist benefits. But it's an extremely heavy cost to consumers and all the other businesses. Take, for instance, the to ship a barrel of oil from Texas, from the Gulf of Mexico, there from Texas to New York, it costs 3 times as it costs to send it further to Canada. And people in Alaska, I first learned about this years ago when I was in Alaska, and found out that the Alaska Lumber and Pulp Company, in order to save costs on shipping to their products from Alaska to Seattle, they had to send it on non-Jones Act ships all the way over to Tokyo and then back to Seattle. It's just outrageous. And I'd say that it drove the sugar industry out of business in Hawaii, because it's so expensive to send things on ships from Hawaii to the mainland. It's much easier you can send it cheaper from the Philippines, which is much further away to California than Hawaii, or you could send, of course, then that also adds to the trucking use, the people who can't use ocean going shipping, which is normally very a cheap alternative to trucks and railroads. They'll find that they have to use more trucks and railroads, which are much more damaging to highways, to lives, to pollution, and so on like that, because the law has made it so expensive to use ships.
Well, I'm going to jump in here, Ken, and say I'm going to take up your cause on this. I definitely want to hear what you guys are going to talk about, because I was not aware of the Jones Act. The entire regulatory environment is littered, and I use the word littered, with these kinds of little nuggets. My hobby horse, by the way, was something that was called the Wright Amendment, and that was for Jim Wright, who actually had American Airlines in his district. And the Wright Amendment made it illegal for Southwest to actually have anybody fly into Dallas from outside of the state of Texas. So Southwest basically couldn't fly into Dallas, which was their home. And the Wright Amendment was there for forever. And it eventually got repealed. And of course, Jim Wright, who had, not a great reputation, was driven out of office for some serious corruption and issues. But the thing is that I would tell people about this who would tell me, well, regulations are, it's okay. And I'm like, okay, except that everybody who wants to go to Dallas, that would be me, you're in Dallas right now, but imagine how much money was spent and how much crazy went on. So literally, if I wanted to fly to Dallas before this was repealed, I would have to fly from California. I'd have to land in another city in Texas and then take another flight to Dallas. And it's the same type of thing that you're talking about. And this will be another cause that I will take up. I use that as a stalking horse against overregulation and pointing out how insane those regulations are, and they cost everybody money. And you cannot tell me, so what did it actually do? Did it make American Airlines a better airline? No, it did not. In fact, it made American Airlines protected in their home market, but competition is what everybody wants to strive for. So I had to share that with you, Jim. I didn't want to, I'm not trying to trump you, because I think the Jones thing it sounds insane. But it would be fascinating to go see how many of these little nuggets there are. It would probably be a lot of heartburn in the process. So you're talking about the Jones Act. What else are you talking about? That one's got me a little bit stirred, because I've never thought of it that way. And I can imagine how much crazy happens because of this kind of aberrations that are put into the market.
Well, that's an interesting point just the impact of this Jones Act on Hawaii. For example, for a cruise ship to go from one island to the other, it had to be on a Jones Act ship. But if they went 1,000 miles down to Kiribati and then back up to the next island, then they could be on a non-Jones Act ship, and that was cheaper. Same thing for taking cargo from Hawaii to California. They'd have to go down 1,000 miles out of the way to Mexico or Vancouver before they could make a stop in the US, and that would be cheaper. It was even cheaper to fly cattle in a 747 airplane than to take a Jones Act ship to California. The examples are just bizarre. And yet, what you're talking about is how America preaches to the world about the virtues of free markets. They do this when they're talking about the horrors of Cuba and Venezuela and so on. We preach to the world about the free markets,
Right.
but we don't practice it because the politicians are in the pockets of their cronies so often. And I'm remembering how Jim Wright, if I'm correct in saying, wasn't he found out to have a lot of companies would buy copies of his book, which was a nothing book, just to throw away because it was a way of funneling money into his pocket. Wasn't that how he did it?
I'll tell you, Ken, I don't know if we could have this kind of cynical talk about this. I mean, there's author jealousy. I see it right there in front of me. Yeah, well, that by the way, that's how he got busted. So here's how he got. I mean, according to the source that I have, he got busted because there was a union that had thousands, tens of thousands of members, and they bought that number of books. Now, here's how he gets busted. They bought them. They were all boxed up and palletized, and they were sitting in a warehouse, and no one ever got a copy of the book. And that's how he got busted, because it was like, well, listen, if you buy 10,000 books and you distribute 10,000 books, then it had a harder time doing it. But in fact, he sold them by the pallet full to people, and I guess that it was almost like these guys who store your gold or something like that. It's okay. Here's your gold. Here's your silver. Here's Jim Wright's phony book deliveries right here. Yes, that you got it. You nailed it, Jim. Jim, Ken. I mean, I can't imagine that. Not many people would have known that, but yes, he got busted for that. And Newt Gingrich drummed him out of the Congress because he said, "Listen, this is not even close to being laughable." So, but yeah, you're right. You nailed it.
Maybe it is author's jealousy. I'd like to have people buy my book, but I don't want to have them just thrown away. People from time to time have offered to buy copies of the books to distribute them to the legislators in Hawaii. And I tell them, no, it's a waste of paper. They're not the ones who are going to read it or pay any attention to the ideas of free markets.
Well, see, but here's the thing. You don't have to worry about that. See, Jim Wright's books were never going to be thrown away because they were never leaving the warehouse. See, they were safe. They were safe now, Ken. So let's not, I don't want to disparage Jim for, being frivolous or landfilling. No, they weren't even going anywhere. So, well, okay, that's fascinating. So you're going to be talking about the Jones Act. By the way, I have my own version of that with electric cars today, but maybe we'll leave that for another discussion with you, because let's focus on your stuff. So what else are you going to talk about at Freedom Fest?
Well, I'm also going to be on a panel that's going to address some of the issues with regard to immigration and the immigration policy and so on. And I'm quite a fan of immigrants. I think that they've been very beneficial to the country, and I think being open to immigrants is something that has provided enormous benefits and refuge to people throughout history when they've been seeking freedom from persecution and famine and destitution. And I mean, you look at our own history, the founding fathers all broke the laws of England in order to sign the Declaration of Independence. And one of the reasons that they objected to King George III was because he stood in the way of allowing people to come to the colonies at the time. And I think that we benefited enormously by them. And I think we've done a lot of disparagement towards the benefits of immigrants. And so I'm more on the side of this championing them today, especially where there's people who are desperate to leave Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti, Hong Kong. I would think that the United States could benefit enormously by being much more embracing of these people. It takes courage to be championing freedom. And I think that a lot of times it's people's fears that cause them to be quite reticent about the newcomers.
Well, I'll put in my ideas about this thing. I mean, here we have a bifurcation problem, in my opinion. We have lots of very talented people who cannot get into the United States under any circumstance whatsoever, even though they have degrees, advanced degrees, and they're going to bring capability here, and they cannot get here. And if you want to go get in here legally, because we don't have a merit-based system, it is very, very difficult for people to get here. And on the other side, we have people who come here across the border who understand that once they get here, that the welfare state that we now have will in fact give them a certain status and give them a certain amount of money. When you look at it, and I understand, my father was born on the Polish-Ukrainian border. I understand about immigration, but I also understand about how when you get here, that you know, it isn't to get here to work the system, it's to get here to work. And when people say, well, but there's exploitation of workers, okay, all right, I give you some of that. But the worst thing you could do, though, is if you're going to open the borders, I agree with Milton Friedman. You cannot have an open checkbook for people. You just cannot do that. But on the other side, you have to have a merit-based system, in my opinion, because right now the Canadians are stealing massive amounts of talent because they have a merit-based system. They're stealing talent. And I think that that's ridiculous because, you know, frankly, under our current immigration laws, we could never get the scientists who built the Manhattan Project. If you actually didn't have political subterfuge, they would have never made it in. I mean, I'm an example of a business partner that and he's Canadian. I mean, you know, we're not talking about a guy who's from, you know, someplace that's dangerous. And even though he had all of this experience, even though he had, you know, worked in the U.S. defense industry in other ways, we needed to bring him and get him a green card status because of the Patriot Act, by the way. For those who don't know, the Patriot Act negated the NATO treaty. The NATO treaty basically said that anyone who was Canadian or British or the Commonwealth would be treated as an American as long as they had no felonies or any bad background. That went out the window, by the way. It just totally went out the window. And that's unknown. Most people don't know it. So it took us 4 sets of lawyers, over $100,000 and thousands of days to get him a green card. Insane.
That you're so right. That's interesting that we would say we will defend these countries in NATO. And I didn't know about that. I'm really glad you told me about this. That we would defend these people in NATO and with our money and our blood and so on for all this, but we don't trust them to come. And I think that is atrocious. I think it's quite revealing that when the Eastern European countries were admitted into the European Union, at first there was a lot of panic. Oh, everybody's going to leave Eastern Europe. But actually what happened, some people did come, but a lot more went into Eastern Europe for the investment opportunities. Those were, right. They could go back and forth. Even when they opened up with and admitted Spain, more people left the European Union to go back to Spain because now they could go back and forth freely. They didn't have to worry about hiding in the shadows and so on. So there was a lot of surprising things. Plus, there's 10 million Americans living abroad, and they do so because of economic opportunities all around the world.
Well, and so I think that there'd be more with you that you and I would agree on immigration than not. I am very much in favor of immigration, but I'm not for people showing up, especially in places like California, which is where I'm at, and watching the sense that, you know what, we have to go over the top. We have to do all what we have. And again, I understand the challenges of languages. I understand these things, but what we have to do is we have to make sure that people understand that there is some level of assimilation. And if there isn't a level of assimilation, then we're going again. Whenever you create bifurcation in systems, in my experience, or beyond that, you always create this challenge that means you have this permanent underclass, and that I think becomes very difficult and very challenging.
What I think you've got an excellent point there about what Milton Friedman raised with regard to the welfare state is an interesting problem. And it could be just as well applied to allowing people to give birth to children. You can say, well, we can't allow people to have children. They're going to be dependent for 18 years or so, learning the customs and the language and so on, and they're going to be dependent on the welfare system. Well, actually, there shouldn't be a welfare system. It shouldn't be for Americans either. And who has that up? It's the Democrats and Republicans that all tend to vote for it. I mean, regardless of what they say about it, they all tend to keep voting for it and supporting it increasingly over the years. So I would say the politicians are the ones responsible for that establishment of that system. And if they made it, they can get rid of it. And rather than to blame it on people in desperate conditions in other countries that are just looking for a freer place to live, I'm thinking of, for example, during the days of slavery in America, there were slaves who were desperate to flee from southern states into northern states. And they passed this law called the Fugitive Slave Act, said it was illegal for a slave to leave its owner. It was property that was stealing itself. And anyone who helped them to escape was a criminal as well. Well, actually, by a matter of rights, an individual has a right to leave tyranny, whether it's private tyranny or government tyranny, and go to a free place. And the law that stops them from fleeing is also responsible for their continued existence. And so we find that this same kind of thing exists around the world over the years. There were a lot of people, millions of people, who tried to flee Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin during the 30s and 40s, and they were prohibited by our quotas. Now, think about it. We've got quotas on sugar that are just arbitrarily set by politicians, saying how much sugar we're allowed to buy from other countries, even though it could be 1/4 the price. And yet, in order to provide benefits to their contributors and certain special interests in the United States, they set up arbitrarily how much sugar we can buy from another country. Well, the same people have set up quotas on how many people we can hire. In fact, they made it illegal for us to hire people as contract labor in other countries. I came from Hawaii, and most of the people who migrated to Hawaii came as contract laborers. The Japanese, Chinese, and Portuguese were hired as contract laborers to come and work the plantations in Hawaii. That's where they all got their start. But all of that was made illegal because the people who were there felt jealous and envious of the fact that they might have to face the competition of people who were willing to work harder and at less pay than themselves. And frankly, I go, the right to hire somebody is the employer's right to hire the person. It's not the right of an employee to a job, regardless of how good he is.
Well, and again, I agree with you that we should, and this is where I lean towards having a merit-based system, which is we want the best and brightest that we can possibly get, and we want to understand what that is. And this it's really interesting to watch the gymnastics that the current socialist left, the radical left today in Congress goes through, because they'll talk about things like, well, what we really want is we want socialism like Sweden, and because Sweden offers education for everyone. Well, years ago, I had a finance company, and I had this woman who was from Sweden, and she worked for me, and she was very ambitious. And her sister came from Sweden, and we went out to dinner. And I said, well, why didn't you come to America? So, oh, no, I'm not the ambitious one. And they described the fact that when you hit a certain age, 8th grade was what they said, is that they gave everybody tests, compulsory tests, every child. And they found out and determined this is a socialist ideal. We know we know in the 8th grade what Ken was going to be and what John Paul was going to be. We know whatever. And so I ended up building a story around it, which is, So there's two young guys who have got, grown up together, and there's Olaf and Sven, and they say, Olaf, you've tested through the roof. We're going to put all of our resources. We're going to send you this advanced school. We're going to get you through, and you're going to be a doctor. You're going to be, you're going to be just somebody to really contribute a great deal to society. Now, everybody contributes, but you're going to be a great guy, and we're going to cover that. You're going to get your freight paid for. Now, Sven, here's the story. Here's how you scored. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to go to a different school than your friend for the rest of this. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be castrating caribou, because you know what? You can't screw it up. You really can't, because you're going to be out castrating caribou. Now, when I told the story back to these two women, they were howling with laughter, because they said that's so close to being true. Now, it is because they know best. And if somebody would have said, in the 8th grade, well, is this guy Ken going to write a book that's going to be in 55 different language or 85 languages or 55 countries or whatever, is that going to happen? I mean, can you go back and have somebody say that? Well, but in America or in a free society, let's just say a libertarian mindset, is we don't know what you're going to do. We don't even know today what you may achieve that could happen. And that to me is the power of the individual and the power of liberty.
Absolutely. Johan Norberg has done a lot of, he's this brilliant Swedish economist, very libertarian, worked with the Cato Institute as well. He's done a lot of studies about Sweden, and Sweden isn't of one mindset. There's a lot of movement within Sweden to introduce free market ideas and thinking. For example, competition in the postal services, school vouchers, and things like that. Now, they had reached a peak of their welfare system back in the 60s and 70s, but since then they've backed off considerably from it, and they're realizing the benefits of competition in the marketplaces as well. So, in fact, I remember there was a study by Timbro, the Public Policy Institute in Sweden some years ago, that indicated that if Sweden was a state of the United States, it would be probably the lowest income state in the United States. I think it's not at the very bottom, but in any case, there are a lot of reasons to be thinking that Sweden is not the paradise that the socialist paradise that a lot of socialists in this country might think that it is.
Well, and I'm not picking on Sweden, but I'm just saying that anyone who thinks that we can predict the future, anybody who's out there who's listening to us right now, because I gambled professionally for 4 years, so if you actually can predict the future, and I'll even cut Ken in on a little of this, because we're finding, contact me, because I know how to make money by anybody who can accurately predict the future. The problem is that I haven't met anybody with that kind of magical touch for any length of time that is actually real. So that's the challenge, is that we don't know what will happen, and that's really important. And again, my push against regulations is here we have the Jones Act that I just found out about. That's for 101 years. We have been trying to save an industry which was going to go away anyway. And we decided, well, we're going to lay it in there this certain way, and it's going to cost us, a lot of money to do it. And to me, that's the thing that I worry about with socialist states, is they build up bureaucracies, which are a little bit like, and I don't know if you have this in Hawaii, but you have this devil grass. You have devil grass, and no matter what you do to try to rip out the devil grass, even droughts, the devil grass won't go away. The regular grass dies, the devil grass stays, and that's what I see about what you're describing. So, okay, so that's the second thing you're doing. That's great.
Yeah. What I liked about the Austrian School of Economics, von Mises and Hayek and Rothbard, were that they are the number one skeptics of the Keynesian tendency towards predictions and forecasts. They know that people are much more unpredictable than that. They can anticipate what will happen, but not when. And I think that the Keynesians all the time, when they're trying to forecast so that they can implement their economic model manipulations, if they get the forecast wrong, which they often do, they're more likely to make things worse rather than better. And may I give you one example of this?
Love to have it.
2001, there was predictions about the what the economy was going to be like. And at the beginning of the year, this is from the Economist magazine, not I didn't make it up. 95% of the economists that had been surveyed in these national surveys said that there would be no recession in 2001, no recession. And by September of that year, 65% of the economists still said there will be no recession. But the economists said the economy had already been in a recession for 6 months, and most of them still didn't even see it. That's how off they were in 2001. They were just, and with that kind of the Washington Post one time did a survey of economists. They said, 7 economists, please tell us whether the economy is going to go up or down in the next quarter, not way in the future, not by how much, just is it going to go up or down in the next quarter? And out of those 7 economists, 2 of them got it right. That means 5 of them got it wrong. And you can get a better prediction with the flip of a coin.
Well, and I have a way to solve this problem for you, Ken, and that is whenever I'm talking, because I do a lot of business consulting, and people are telling me about their forecasts and their market share gain and all of that. And what I do is I very subtly make sure I have the right glasses on to listen to their forecasts, and I say, oh, those charts are looking better. Oh, that story looks so good. Oh, it's so amazing. And of course, even as a clean and sober guy, I see exactly what you're saying. So I mean, I have these close by always, because when people start telling me that way, I don't have to use foul language. I just subtly explain to them that I have to see it through these glasses, or I would not believe their proclamations. So,
John Paul, I gotta get some glasses like that. That's so cool.
Well, all right. So what we'll do is we'll make a note, make sure that we get you some glasses. Well, and I did a seminar, and again, I do business seminars. I did a business seminar, and I gave everybody a pair of these, and I said, listen, at the appropriate time, I want everybody to put these on, because then you'll see that I'm thinner, more hair, better looking, sound, just melodic and so wonderful. And yeah, but yeah, we all need some rose-colored glasses at some point in time. The thing is, I just don't want people running the government to have them, because they're spending your money and my money.
Yeah.
Well, as this has been a fascinating discussion. So Ken, talk to me about why people should come to Freedom Fest, because I think that's one of those questions that it's always kind of driven me a little bit, because I think it is the best bargain out there to meet people like yourself, meet people like like if your wife has this experience from China. Wow, that's wow about Mao. I mean, that's but talk about why should people come to Freedom Fest?
Well, Freedom Fest is a real collection of great minds. And of course, I like to think of that as being one that's going there. I love meeting up with my friends there. I keep going back every year because so many of my friends from around the planet keep showing up there. I mean, Leon Lowe came from South Africa. Jose Cordero came from, he was from Venezuela, now he's from Spain. My friends from Japan, my friends from Mexico, all over the planet are coming there. And now they were at Las Vegas all the time. So there was always plenty of entertainment out on the streets. But then last year they got shut down by Las Vegas at tremendous loss, and very rudely, I would say. So finally this year they said, well, to heck with Las Vegas, we're going to go to South Dakota, where we know they're not going to shut us down. We'll be right at Mount Rushmore and have a nice venue. And the people that come there, you get a lot of interesting topics. And the interesting thing is you may have 10 topics going on at the same time. The hardship is actually getting around to everything that you may find of interest.
Right.
because you go to one and you're missing out on the others. Now you can get recordings of those, but it's a lot more fun to be there and asking the questions. So there's a tremendous range of different topics for you to get involved with. Plus, there's the Anthem Film Festival. Joanne Skousen has put together probably the best libertarian free market collection of film shorts and film features that have been produced throughout the year. And you can be watching films through the whole time if you want to. And it's usually just a very, very fun, energizing atmosphere because you're with a lot of other people that cherish and value freedom. And of course, we have disagreements about things, and Mark always tries to put together people who have opposite points of view about things so that there's some electricity generated. It's never a dull, boring academic lecture. Well, I mean, that sort of thing does occur, but he does his very best to make it entertaining. Because Mark, he's a great showman, but he's also a brilliant mind. I use his textbooks in my economics classes. The Making of Modern Economics is my favorite of all time. It's sort of a history of economic thought. And the Economics on Trial, Lies, Myths, and Realities, how he takes the 10 leading textbooks and tells you what's wrong with them. Chicago versus Vienna, where he compares the monetarist school with the Austrian school. I mean, his books are fantastic, and he's there talking about them and talking about a lot of other interesting things.
Well, I think that there's no better reason to go than, of course, you're going to get to meet Ken Schoolland. And if you get to meet Ken, you get to meet all kinds of other interesting people. And I'm going to give everybody directions on how to get there. Now, if you're in the continental United States, I already had something else planned, but now he's not in Hawaii right now, so I got to. Yeah. But if you're in the continental United States, the first thing you do, you don't even need Google. Locate Interstate 90. Determine, and by the way, if you can't find Interstate 90, then go to your fourth grade teacher and get a refund. But what I want you to do is locate Interstate 90. Determine, are you east or west of Rapid City, South Dakota? If you find out you are east of Rapid City, South Dakota, and you're on Interstate 90, head west. When you get to the wide spot in the road in South Dakota, 78,000 people live there, and they call it home, called Rapid City. If you're on the west side, because I won't leave you hanging, don't because I know today you have to give very explicit directions. I have seen the amazing part about technologies. I've seen people trying to get out of parking garages and using GPS. So yeah, if you're on the west side, aim east, wide spot in the road, and be there July 21st to the 24th. I think it's going to be a fantastic time. The thing I love about doing these interviews, I get to meet very fascinating, very interesting people, and I learned something. I learned about the Jones Act, which is just, it's gonna drive me crazy because it's another one of those insane things that no one ever even thinks about, but it costs you money every day. It is the insidious nature of regulation, in my opinion. It is a tax on your life, and it is a retardation of growth, economic change that can take place. Ken, any final words before we wrap up this very interesting interview?
You just reminded me of one crazy thing. They've got to rename the Jones Act and name it something, the Matson Monopoly Law or something like that. Because can you believe it? To Puerto Rico, if they buy oil from the Gulf of Mexico at Texas, it's more expensive than if they buy the oil from Russia or China, because it has to be on a Jones Act ship. That's how bizarre and crazy this sort of stuff is. And yet those laws are in place, solidly backed by the administration. And so, we've got to inform people to get it changed, make it a freer world. But I thank you for helping publicize this.
Well, I couldn't have asked for a greater or best way to wrap up, today, because you are my last interview for today. And for all of you who are out there, this is John Paul Mendoza. And this has been, it's a Paul World, and I've had Ken Schoolland, and he lives in Hawaii, but he's going to be there in Rapid City, South Dakota. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you very much, John Paul. And I'll be looking for you in the history books.
Excellent.